You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
In response to your feedback, we're now offering the Caveat newsletter, a single weekly digest of news and analysis previously covered in our pro-policy, privacy, and disinformation briefings. If you're already a pro subscriber, thank you. You'll have access starting this week. And for everyone else, visit cyberwire.com/pro and sign up today. This episode is supported by Code Comments, an original podcast from Red Hat. Be honest, do you comment your code? You know, when you're working on a project and you leave behind a small note in the code, a code comment, to help others learn what isn't clear in the code. Sometimes we leave comments for other people. Sometimes we leave comments for ourselves, a type of breadcrumbs. There's a lot of work required to bring a project from purchase to production, and the documentation doesn't always cover changing team dynamics. So the Code Comments podcast, which is hosted by Jamie Parker, he's a Red Hatter and an experienced engineer. In every episode, Jamie recounts the stories of experienced technologists from all across the industry who share what they've learned from implementing new technology. So if you're interested in real stories from real people going through real change, check out the Code Comments podcast. You can search for Code Comments in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to Code Comments for their support. The Budworm APT's bespoke tools, Johnson Controls sustains a cyber attack. The U.S. Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board reports on Section 702, the looming government shutdown and cyber risk. Cybersecurity in the U.S. industrial base. The platform formerly known as Twitter cuts back on content moderation capabilities. In our Industry Voices segment, Nicholas Kathmann from LogicGate describes the struggle when facing low-cost attacks. Sam Crowther from Kasada shares his team's findings on stolen auto accounts. And Ukrainian hacktivists target Russian airline check-in systems. I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire Intel briefing for Thursday, September 28th, 2023. Symantec says that the Budworm APT, tracked by others as Emissary Panda or APT-27, in August 2023 used a new version of its sysupdate backdoor to target a Middle Eastern telecommunications organization and an Asian government. The researchers note the targeting of a telecommunications company and government also point to the motivation behind the campaign being intelligence gathering, which is the motivation that generally drives Budworm activity. That Budworm continues to use a known malware, sysupdate, alongside techniques it is known to favor, such as DLL sideloading using an application it has used for this purpose before, indicate that the group isn't too concerned about having this activity associated with it if it is discovered. The report doesn't offer an attribution, but government and telecommunications organizations are common targets for cyber espionage. Building automation company Johnson Controls International has sustained a major ransomware attack that's affected the operations of several of the company's subsidiaries, Bleeping Computer reports. The attackers have encrypted the company's VMware servers and claim to have stolen more than 27 terabytes of corporate data. Bleeping Computer cites a source as saying that the attackers are demanding a $51 million ransom. Johnson Controls confirmed a cybersecurity incident in an 8K filing with the SEC and stated that they are actively evaluating the extent of the information that was compromised and are implementing their incident management and protection plan to address the incident's impact. While many of the company's applications are still functional, it has had to employ workarounds for certain operations to minimize disruptions and maintain customer service. The incident has resulted in disruptions to some of the company's business operations, and the disruption is anticipated to persist. A divided Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board has reported its recommendations concerning Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Section 702 has been controversial for what critics see as its potential for abusive surveillance of U.S. citizens. Intelligence and law enforcement agencies defend the law as an essential authority for collection, especially collection against terrorist organizations. The first 7 recommendations in the report are calls for congressional action, codifying specifically the 12 legitimate objectives for signals intelligence collection under Executive Order 14086. They also recommend that Congress introduce more definition and clarity into Section 702, drawing sharper lines over what's permissible and what's impermissible. The remaining 12 recommendations concern procedures executive agencies might adopt. Most of these involve increased transparency and controls to ensure that querying in particular doesn't run afoul of protections against unreasonable search. It also includes calls for replacing manual review of material collected with new, secure automated procedures. And the report also recommends that intelligence and law enforcement agencies improve their measurement of the outcomes of surveillance. Did they actually achieve operational goals beyond the collection itself? NextGov outlines the potential cybersecurity implications of a U.S. government shutdown, noting that around 80% of employees at CISA would be furloughed during a shutdown. Representative Shontel Brown, a Democrat of Ohio, compared the effects of a government shutdown to those of a ransomware attack, saying it would be dangerous, destructive, and disastrous. Brown added that a shutdown would undercut organizations and state and local governments that are relying on federal funds to prevent crippling ransomware attacks. Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican of South Carolina, countered that the White House could choose to designate CISA employees as essential workers in the event of a shutdown. So, if there is a shutdown, and that remains a big if, since there's always the possibility of an 11th hour continuing resolution before federal fiscal New Year's Day on October 1st, there will be some degradation of federal services. Aprio has released the results of a survey looking at cybersecurity in the manufacturing industry, finding that nearly 2/3 of manufacturers experienced unauthorized access to their company's networks and data in the past year. The survey also found that fewer than half of companies surveyed report having a cybersecurity policy, and only 36% have enhanced IT security. Aprio adds, manufacturers can leverage digital tools to achieve competitive advantage by sharing information across functions and with supply chain partners to improve productivity and respond in real time to operational problems. But most companies are not utilizing this. In fact, 39% of surveyed manufacturers are using 5G networks, and only 21% are using edge computing. X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, has disabled a feature for reporting election misinformation, Reuters reports. The information says X has also cut half of its election integrity team, including the team's head, Aaron Rodrigues. X owner Elon Musk said in a post that the team was undermining election integrity. The Hill notes that X said last month that it was expanding its election safety team to focus on combating manipulation, surfacing inauthentic accounts, and closely monitoring the platform for emerging threats. Social media in general, and X, formerly Twitter in particular, have been used to establish and amplify disinformation during elections. The U.S. elections in November 2024 are expected to receive a great deal of attention from foreign disinformation operators, especially Russian. Several Russian airlines warned customers to expect difficulties at the gates. Cybernews described the issue as a distributed denial of service attack. The IT Army of Ukraine, a cyber auxiliary group operated on behalf of Ukraine, claimed responsibility, stating, "While you're sipping your artisanal latte, our noble neighbors to the north are stuck in queues trying to book flights. Well done, IT Army." The attack was over in a matter of hours, and service is now said to be returning to normal. Coming up after the break, Nicholas Kathmann from LogicGate describes the struggle when facing low-cost attacks. Sam Crowther from Kasada shares his team's findings on stolen auto accounts. Stay with us. And now, a word from our sponsor, KnowBe4. Where would InfoSec professionals be without users making security mistakes? Working less than 60 hours per week, maybe. Actually having a weekend every so often. While user behavior can be a challenge, they can also be an InfoSec professional's greatest asset once properly equipped. Users want to do the right thing, but often lack the knowledge to do so. That's one of the reasons KnowBe4 developed Security Coach, a real-time security coaching tool that takes alerts from your existing security stack and sends immediate coaching to users who've taken risky actions. Existing security tools will likely block a user from visiting a high-risk website, for example, but the user might not understand why. Security Coach analyzes these alerts and provides users with relevant security tips via email or Slack, coaching them on why the action they just took was risky. Help users learn from their mistakes and strengthen your organization's security culture with Security Coach. Learn more at knowbe4.com/securitycoach. That's knowbe4.com/securitycoach. And we thank KnowBe4 for sponsoring our show. Struggling to secure on-prem apps with modern identity? Don't worry, you're not alone. Join industry leaders from Fortune 500 organizations to secure your apps on any cloud with any IDP, regardless of your environment's complexity. Meet Strata's identity orchestration platform, Mavericks. Say goodbye to the headaches of app refactoring and legacy tech debt. With identity orchestration, you can modernize legacy apps to use MFA or passwordless authentication in a few weeks, migrate from one IDP to another, and so much more without changing the app. No matter your IAM use case, Strata extends the value of your current identity investments. And the best part? You can try it for free today. Visit strata.io/cyberwire to share your biggest identity challenge, and they'll hook you up with a complimentary pair of AirPods Pro. Don't miss out. Visit strata.io/cyberwire. That's strata.io/cyberwire. Attackers enjoy the advantage of inexpensive, readily available tools to help them do their deeds, which means a relatively low investment for them, but a steady barrage of things to deal with for defenders. In this sponsored Industry Voices segment, I speak with Nicholas Kathmann, CISO of risk and compliance management platform provider LogicGate, on the struggles organizations face with low-cost attacks.
So phishing attempts is a prime example of this. It costs next to nothing, or in many cases free, to send a phishing email. But the companies, the victims, are spending a lot of money on anti-phishing technology and different email filtering capabilities and user awareness training to try to protect against that free attack.
And how do we differentiate between something that is merely a nuisance and something that is truly potentially dangerous?
I mean, I would say if you design your systems correctly and I call it embrace the incident, you're going to have incidents. Things are going to get through. If your systems are designed properly, your security architecture is designed properly, IAM roles are designed properly, almost anything becomes a nuisance. So if you don't have all that stuff in place, We used to call it the Cadbury effect a long time ago. I think there's a different term for it now, but the hard shell GUI center. Once you get into an organization, everything's just wide open and unlocked. Every successful phishing attempt turns into a major incident or a major issue. Whereas if everything's properly locked down, you're using MFA, you're using device trust, you have your admin accounts separated from your normal user accounts, things like that. You have different trust boundaries around different applications, and you've embraced more of the zero trust type of architecture approach. Somebody simply getting the username and password for your system, or even a username and password and an MFA token, the damage, the blast radius is much smaller, and that really just becomes a nuisance at that point. You're just resetting passwords and tokens.
Well, let's come at it from the other direction then. I mean, what are your recommendations for folks to best come at this? What are some of the strategies you think folks should put in place?
So I think a lot of it would start with really just going through attack simulations. So what would happen if this did happen, and kind of, almost tabletop it, but do more of a realistic tabletop. So a phishing attempt happened against a finance user. Okay, so you can either, have your security team or your IT team or somebody knowledgeable within there create it as a finance user and now go look around and see what they have access to. What can they actually do? Or you can pay pen test firms to do this for you as well. And really just figure out, what do they have access to that they shouldn't have had access to, and start to restrict these things down. And then go to the next scenario and just keep working down the list of scenarios of different attack types that can be used against you. And then just, systematically destroy it's in risk you can go through and you can, reduce the risk of it happening, or reduce the likelihood, or you can reduce the impact. What I would say here is, what I recommend here is, use the free technology, the free mechanisms, the free security controls built into, your Office suite, your file sharing suite, whatever else like that, to reduce the impact as much as humanly possible.
Yeah, can we dig into that a little bit? I mean, how do you recommend that folks set their priorities here? Everybody has a limited amount of time and a limited amount of resources. What's a wise way for folks to calibrate how they come at this specific problem?
So a big thing is just getting security involved early on in the project, or any project that's coming up. So once, I always said, if you bring in a security architect after the solution's already created, now the security architect's coming in, proverbially calling the baby ugly. It's already there. There's already a timeline. It's usually like, you get the call for a half an hour meeting to approve a solution, a week before it's set to go live. This is where all the mistakes happen. If you bring in security architecture, if you bring in the security and compliance and privacy teams from the very beginning, before, during project inception, we're going to roll out new application XYZ, but we don't know what that looks like yet. We don't have any diagrams. We haven't written any code. That's when you can really start to get ahead of the problems before they become problems. So really it's just getting ahead, making sure that from the very beginning, security, compliance, privacy are all stakeholders at the table, and can start bringing in the requirements and making sure that, everybody who the implementers of the technology and the application owners and all of the stakeholders understand really what's required, so they can keep that in mind and be educated throughout the entire project lifecycle.
What about communications with the powers that be? Think folks like the board of directors, making sure that they're informed and on board with the plans here.
Yep. So this is really this is going to be where setting clear guidelines, clear goalposts for the different application and owners is going to be really important. So everybody's seen organizations where there's, I call it the paper tiger. There's policies and procedures that the compliance team knows inside and out, and that they use to pass attestations and compliance things. But if you ask any of the end users, even if they've read, signed off that they follow those policies, they probably can't state more than one control. So this is really, making sure that when you're designing these policies, these procedures, these standards, these guidelines, that you do have, technical stakeholders reviewing it. You do have leadership reviewing it as well, so that by the time you go to get it approved, everybody's aware of every line that's in there, and that it's not, and that, people understand what the requirements are, and they've seen it, and they know exactly where to get that, that standard or that guideline that says this is what we should be doing. That's the first step, is just making sure that you're socializing all of your policies, all of your standards, in advance, far in advance of actually making them, final in proofs. But then once you're there, that becomes the guideline, and just making sure that you have a way to measure projects and, different applications against that guideline. And anytime they're not meeting that guideline, that becomes findings. It goes into a risk register, and then that goes up into the summary reports that you're bringing up to the board in terms of this department and their projects, their applications have introduced these amount of risks for not meeting the standards, and then let it from there. They make the decision of, do we accept this, or do we go back and say, no, you need to fix this.
That's Nicholas Kathmann, Chief Information Security Officer at LogicGate. Bot management firm Kasada recently published a report outlining their discovery of nearly 15,000 stolen automotive customer accounts for sale online, with credentials being sold for as little as $2 on Telegram. Sam Crowther is CEO at Kasada.
Our threat research team found evidence that some criminal syndicates had been launching credential stuffing attacks against large, particularly US-based auto manufacturers, and selling the compromised accounts, which contained obviously the VIN numbers, the makes and models of the vehicles, the PII of the owners within some of their Telegram communities. And it was at a scale that was quite alarming to go from zero to where they landed. So it raised just massive red flags on our side, and we figured this is absolutely something we need to talk more about.
Well, what kind of scale are we talking about here? How many stolen accounts did you all track?
So the initial two waves, there was about 15,000 US accounts for these cars that came up for sale.
Well, let's talk about the information that was taken here and why it matters for folks. I mean, I think people are kind of used to getting reports that some of their information has been compromised, their name, their address, maybe something like that. But I think it's fair to say most of us don't think about things like the VINs of our cars.
I completely agree, right? And like when you buy a car from a manufacturer, particularly modern ones, and you sign up for the account to manage your servicing or even, manage the vehicle remotely, you never really think too much about what's going into it and the sort of access and information that it has.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that folks can do with a VIN here. What are the risks?
Something known as car cloning, where criminals can take stolen VIN numbers and use it to create replica tags so that, you may get pulled over when you're driving your car in, Maryland, right? And the police are like, hey, we've got a warrant for this or whatever it is when you get pulled over. And it's actually because someone else who committed a crime who's duped your car's information has done it, somewhere else in the state, right? Which is really, really problematic. There's also the potential for basically the duplication of ownership papers. So someone could own your car from the government's eyes. It's pretty concerning. And when you couple that with the information around where the individuals live, how to contact them, it can start to become, a really scary form of identity fraud.
How so? How would folks use this information specifically?
You can leverage all the, contact and VIN information. It's also possible to take out loans, for example, against the car, additional, cash out, which I guess is the ultimate goal for almost any, identity theft, right? Is money from the banks that's tied to someone else. What's really interesting though on the actual seller's side is how popular and how cheap seemingly these accounts were, right? Normally to get your hands on enough information to properly commit identity fraud, it's going to cost you $500 to $1,000. Whereas you look at some of these automotive accounts and you can pay as little as $2 and you basically have all the information you need to get started.
What are your recommendations for folks to protect themselves against this sort of thing?
So look, the number one would be, and I know it's said over and over again, but unique passwords, particularly on systems like this. I know it's probably not something many of us think about being overly sensitive, but the reality is it's actually quite important for us to protect it. So making sure that, access to that account is, 2FA where it can be, it's a strong password. And then, if you can disable certain functionality or you can avoid having some of these accounts entirely, maybe if it's not going to, impede your user experience, it may be best to do so, right? In a lot of cases, most people don't need these accounts. Most of the cards attached to these were old from what we could see, and there was no app to control them remotely for these older models. So there was really no big value add, yet they'd sort of been, driven to sign up by the manufacturer.
Is there any responsibility from the car manufacturers here? I mean, have they chimed in on any of their attempts to secure this kind of thing?
A huge responsibility, right? Like, this is ultimately their problem. If this happened in any other industry where the information was as sensitive, there would be outrage. Like, imagine if, the MyChart accounts you have for your medical information had the same problem. Like, the impact would be pretty material. And functionally, this is very sensitive PII. So we've reached out and tried to notify the manufacturers. One has engaged, the others have remained silent. The one that's engaged has been really good and proactive about actually, properly digging in and looking at what went wrong and how to address it, which is great to see.
Yeah. Where do you suppose we're headed here? I mean, could you see regulations coming that could help tie these sorts of things down better?
General security, rules and regulations around liability is something that will help here, right? The world is so fast-paced, and particularly if you take the case of auto manufacturers who've been ripped out of the Stone Age very, very quickly. There's just so many different unique cases and data sets and data types to deal with. But, laws around, hey, what is acceptable for an organization to lose when it comes to customer data, right? How many accounts can be compromised before there are some, whether it's like criminal or other sorts of charges brought against the company? That's really where this needs to go. And if you look at other countries, they're starting to move there, right? Like, actually, my home country of Australia has recently implemented some new laws around liability if organizations are shown to be negligent. And the penalties are really severe, right? Similar to what you'd see in the European Union. And I really think that's the best way to do it, because right now the equation these companies make is, what's the chance we get caught? How much is it going to cost us if we get caught? We're fine to accept that risk without actually really considering what the impact to their customers is.
That's Sam Crowther from Kasada. Introducing ArcSight Intelligence by OpenText, an enterprise behavior analytics solution. Intelligence repurposes data you're probably already collecting to uncover patterns of behavior missed by other UBA offerings. With its powerful, unsupervised machine learning models trained continuously and exclusively on your data, Intelligence is your ally in detecting insider threats and novel attacks. No rules to maintain or thresholds to update, just context-rich threat hunting leads. Learn more about ArcSight Intelligence by visiting arcsight.com/cyberwire. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like the CyberWire are part of the daily intelligence routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector. as well as the critical security teams supporting the Fortune 500 and many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Trey Hester with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show was written by our editorial staff. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. What's the true cost of a single cybersecurity incident? Try $4.3 million, and it's even higher in the United States. Each organization faces more than 1,200 cyber attacks per year. Tally that up, and you're staring down some hefty losses. Getting ahead of these threats requires the right technology for tying cyber risk to business impact, so you can add context to any risk decision, prioritize remediation, and report what matters most to your key stakeholders. LogicGate's Risk Cloud Cyber Risk and Controls Compliance solution makes all of that possible. Learn more at LogicGate.com. One final note, if you missed our recent panel discussion with my friends at Unit 42 by Palo Alto Networks and Dragos on securing industrial infrastructure, you can catch the conversation on demand by visiting thecyberwire.com/Dragos.